don't try to do anything about the chatter. So the if there's a preference for like stillness, then that subtle preference will keep the chatter going. So it's a kind of aversion, right? You want the mind to be still, or you have an aversion um to thinking and to chatter. So that aversion itself will keep it going. You can see the existence of the chatter and the existence of any of the hindrances as a way that makes you non-preferential. So don't see it as a problem or as something you want to stop. It's a natural part of the meditation process. Often, or a way of looking at it is, yeah, thoughts are just part of it, and that when you become still, or as you do the practice, there's like psychological de-stressing that's going to happen. So you're thinking, you might even be thinking like, why does it seem like I'm thinking more now than I usually am? So it's two things. On one hand, you're actually noticing thought and the amount of chatter that happens. Most of the day you're focused on other things. And then two, like rapidity of the chatter, or the intensity of the chatter is higher, or it could be, it's more perceptible because you're in the meditative process. It's like as you calm and as you develop the enlightenment factors, it's like it triggers these bouts of thinking. I'll give you an example. Like normally, I don't think I don't have much internal commentary, but when I go on retreat and then I go into silence, I notice that there's actually a lot more than there usually is. Is because in those conditions of the retreat, I'm meditating like 6 hours a day, something like that. So when I'm sitting in the session, it's really quiet. But then as soon as I'm out of the session, there can be quite a lot of thinking. Mm-hmm. So that's because of the de-stressing component that is very much present, depending on how much meditation you're doing. So it's a way that you can see it as kind of like a calibration that's happening. So when the preference for thinking is really not there anymore, or the aversion against it, that's when you start to notice more stillness. Another thing to take note of, and this is for everyone as well, is that your mind already is quiet. So if you observe it now, you can observe your mind now and kind of take in notice the entire spaciousness of this quality called mind or consciousness. And the thinking that is present is just a very minor part of this soup of experience. It's just that it gets a lot of attention, especially when you're sitting. So then it seems like, oh, okay, wow, like I'm doing the meditation, but like, why am I thinking more? Yeah, if you take a moment to notice like the noticing itself, or the awareness itself is silent. It's a quiet knowing, and that's what's registering thinking. So you can discern that. You can see how, yeah, there's words and thoughts, but when you start to become aware, you'll see that the awareness itself is quiet. The knowing itself is quiet. So one thing everyone can do now to get an understanding of this is like keep your body still for a moment and give your mind complete permission to wander or say whatever it wants. Now, just you can say to your mind, okay, do what you want. Say what you want. Okay, you're noticing anything different? What is it saying? Is it mostly mental pictures? So let's continue again. Just say, okay, do what you want. And now just watch. So then we'll do another experiment right now. So tune into so notice the part of your mind that is talking. Just like put your attention on that part of your mind that's talking. Listen to it essentially. So let's notice, let's listen again. Listen to that part of your mind that's speaking. And just, you don't need to use focus, but just listen. Are you noticing that there's some kind of interruption in your mind's ability to generate sentences if you're listening to it? So that part of your mind that talks is tied into the faculty of like inner listening. So for example, the reason that mantra is effective, at least for this type of internal commentary, is that when you get to the point where you're listening to the mantra, like the mantra's habituated enough in your mind that you're able to just listen to it. It plays on its own. Because you're listening to the mantra, or because you're listening at all, the part of your mind that sub-vocalizes or speaks is basically tied up. So say Samarahang and then wait for the next one to come up. Don't make it happen, but just do it right now. That's how you do this. So I demonstrated this to give you an example, to give you some examples as to how the inner machinations work of the mind. When you're meditating, of course, just let everything happen. But it's to show you that even something that you think is as like spontaneous and overpowering, whatever, you just can't, make your mind be quiet no matter what you do. I just showed you in 2 seconds that if you do the right thing, that boom, the mental silence is immediately accessible. So yeah, it goes to show that it's the challenges that we have in meditation and practice there, they seem a lot larger than they actually are. But if you just know what you're doing, then these things, you're able to work with them. So like, for example, if you were on a retreat and you did the whole like, hey, I'm just going to watch, but really your internal talk just like keeps rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling. What you could do to silence that is to just listen. It's not through force that things are smoothened out or overcome. It's through knowledge. Like what I just shared, I learned that myself. No one taught me what I just showed you. I was doing I think a 3-day retreat at home or something, and I was like, man, these thoughts are wild. Like the amount of talk is just excessive. And then I just asked my mind, I said, hey, how do I work with this? And then a voice said, listen. And that was the answer. Another thing, and this is important, I'm explaining this because it helps all of you get in touch with your inner teacher. There's me that's explaining things to you or whoever it is you're learning from, but then there's your intuition that is able to guide you directly. So an example of this is I was on retreat and I was with a monk in Thailand, and I said, yeah, I mean, I'm just being like assaulted by sleepiness. I feel like I've been sleepy for a week. I was doing Dhammakaya 2 mantra and visualization. Every time I sat, I would just get knocked out with sleep. And his advice at first was, just increase the vividness of your mindfulness. Be more awake. Do more walking meditation. You're in a war now. You have to destroy the hindrances, which is a standard approach from the Theravada tradition, actually. And so I tried that. I just fought it for days. Fought it. And then eventually I was like, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this. So then I just asked. I asked the intuition, the higher mind, how do I resolve this? And it gave me extremely specific instruction, which was word for word this. On the exhalation, stop and remain in the space before the inhalation. So like so when you're breathing, there's a gap between the in-breath and the out-breath. It's just that we don't notice it. So it said, so when my breath went out, the voice would say, stay. And so I would stay. And then the next breath, and then it would go out again, and the voice, stay again. Stay. And so I just kept staying in the space between the breaths, primarily after the exhalation. Then after like 15 minutes or something, the time in the exhalation became quite long. So I was like remaining naturally breathless for, 30 seconds or 45 seconds. And then after 15 minutes or so, there was a kind of energy that arose inside the body, like a kind of vibration. And my whole body became full of that chi, and then bang, the sleepiness was dispelled. So then every time I had the sleepiness after, I would start the meditation by going, by noticing that gap to the point where it would dispel the sleepiness. And then I was able to really just not do anything after that. Because if one of the 5 hindrances is present to a sufficient extent, even if you sit there and you don't do anything, the hindrances just whip you around. Sleepiness whips you around, restlessness whips you around, whatever it is. So the idea is that you're being essentially guided or trained to overcome the hindrances reflexively. And then you're actually able to sit there and not do anything. Because before that point, you trying to not do anything or me trying to not do anything was falling in and out of sleep, just being whipped around. So the not doing anything is a very, I give that instruction in 2 cases. I give that instruction in the case where someone has been meditating for a long time and they're very attached to the practice, and there's just a lot of craving, honestly. And so I tell them, stop. Like when you sit, just sit. Don't try to do anything. And then the other time I give that instruction is that you're at a point in your practice where the hindrances they're not very overpowering anymore. And then you can just sit and not try. Yeah. So not trying, not doing anything, is one of the highest. It's not even a method, it's just reality, right? If the mind doesn't have sufficient enlightenment factors like tranquility, mindfulness, equanimity, then when you try that, you find that you're just being spun around. So it's often not a good, I don't give that advice to beginners generally. Sometimes I do, but I usually don't, for this reason. Because once you're already, you've had some stillness that's beginning to develop, that means your equanimity factor is getting higher. Your tranquility factor is increasing. So those act as natural buffers, and they're naturally supported when you do nothing and you just sit. Yeah, so this type of practice in Dzogchen is called non-meditation, and in Zen is called Shikantaza. And I've met a lot of Zen practitioners who've done this as their main practice for many years. And I'm like, yeah, so what happens in Shikantaza? And they're like, oh, I'm just like thinking about this and that the whole time. So there's no, kind of cessation or thinking or calming. They're like, no, I just think about stuff. And I'm like, are you able to watch the thinking? They're like, yeah, but that's not the instruction. The instruction is to really, really not try. And I'm like, yeah, I got it. But if there isn't sufficient tranquility, then it's no different than like, you know, your rumination in the shower where you're planning stuff. So this is where we got to be careful, at least cognizant of it. Yeah. In Dzogchen, for example, non-meditation is introduced right at the beginning. But if a person is not able to do non-meditation, meaning they're not able to actually just sit there and do nothing, then there's methods to have the mind come to some calm to a degree. And why is the calming a factor? Because once the calming is present, then your presence or your mindfulness is able to rest primarily unbroken. So when I sit here and do non-meditation, my mind will wander for a few seconds, probably once every 6 or 7 minutes. And then it's back to just not doing, and then it's back to presence and not doing anything. And so my mind naturally does that. Within an hour, it wanders a few times, and that's it. So the beginning meditator, so my range is like 95% of the time not wandering, 5% of the time wandering. The beginning meditator has the exact inverse number, which is that 5% of the time they're aware and 95% of the time they're not aware. So through practice, that number, that ratio changes. So let's say when you get to the point where you're relaxed, but you've had some intention involved and you're like at the 40 to 50% range, that's when Shikantaza and non-meditation becomes effective at that point. Because before that, you're just like, okay, I sat for an hour, but I was sleepy the whole time, you know. Okay, I sat for an hour, but I was angry. You see? So the hindrances, they have that's their job. You know, their job is to obstruct the meditation. If you see this process as a kind of mastery of your mind, mastery of mental processes, you see the hindrances as your 5 Roshis. You know, they're like your 5 teachers. So when the sleepiness hindrance comes up, you're dealing with the sleepiness Roshi. He's like, okay, how are you going to handle me? You know, I'm coming at you with this sword of sleepiness. Are you just going to let me keep whacking you over the head? What are you going to do? You don't always do the same thing. Sometimes you apply some method like I did in my case because it was so prolonged that dynamic. Other times, the sleepiness Roshi is just like, dude, you need a rest. Like, stop. So then you sleep, you come back, and you start meditating, and there's no sleepiness. You see? If the hindrance is anger, that's the anger Roshi. He's like, how are you gonna deal with this? Are you gonna keep fighting me? Or are you gonna look at why it is you're angry and do some forgiveness practice? So let's say it's outside the purview of the 5 hindrances and it's more subtle masters like attachment. So the same attachment or the same fixation, the same fixation or attachment keeps appearing in the meditation, keeps capturing your attention. You keep going to that thing. So that Roshi's presented itself. What are you going to do about it? Yeah, you're going to let me go? You're going to hold on? You're going to try to fight me? What's the move? Sometimes the appropriate thing is to like behead the guy, you know, just cut off his head, right? And in many cases that will kill the hindrance for that time. But because these Roshis are neither dead nor alive, they just come back the next day. The hindrances are trying to get you to look at something. There's an entire Theravada practice called noting. And this comes from the Mahasi Sayadaw tradition out of Burma. So how they approach their practice, I'll give you some background on it. Mahasi Sayadaw found that the traditional jhana practice as they were doing it was very difficult for lay people. So they were using a particular approach to concentration at the time, which was just like fixing your mind on the meditative object and like not letting it go anywhere. So they found that one, only certain people could do this. Two, it took a long time for them to do it. So it required retreats. And for a lot of people, even going on a retreat and doing it, they still couldn't do it. So Mahasi went to the drawing board and was like, hey, so what's a way to get people to path and fruition or cessation that doesn't require, this kind of intense solitude retreat style practice? And he found, he noticed, and many of us have noticed this in our practice, that it is easier for the mind to jump from one thing to another, even if it's being aware, than it is for it to stay on one thing. So he created a practice that fit that and that also had some basis in the commentaries. So his approach was that there would be a noting of anything and everything that arose in the 5 sense doors and in the mind. So whatever it was the attention went to, you just noted that, or you were aware of it. So it would be like this. Now I'm noticing vision, sight, hearing, sound, mental picture, sound, vision, hearing, curiosity, calm, vision, hearing, intending, noticing. So just whatever the primary thing the mind went to, that would become noted. And when you do this, he found that when you do this, it creates an unbroken continuity of mindfulness. So it's like a way of arriving at the unbroken continuity of mindfulness without using a single object. Because he found that not everyone could do it. But that's because the way he was teaching it was to use force. So the approach that I give all of you, where, you're just letting go and your mind stays with one thing for a time, it wanders, it comes back. This actually is not the traditional approach. The traditional approach is force. The problem with the traditional approach is it only works for people that can do it, that actually can use force, that can stay single focused. The reason that force is not effective and that using intense effort is not effective is because unless the person already has a degree of detachment, it will produce immense amounts of craving. Like, really, it will. You're just trying so hard. The boat analogy that I've used with the ocean, I've told all of you there's different ways to the bottom of the ocean, right? You throw the anchor goes down to the depth, and eventually it's realized that the bottom of the ocean is naturally quiet. So that's the approach I teach all of you. Hey, just drop the anchor, say the mantra, feel the loving kindness, and just get out of the way. That's not how it was taught traditionally. The traditional approach is you stay at the surface of the water on the boat, and basically you're just trying as hard as you can. You're holding, you're like, imagine you're dealing with the sail, you're trying to, it takes a lot of effort to move a sail around and to do this whole thing. And so this is you trying to stabilize the mind with force. It's just this fucking disaster. And then at some point, a storm comes. And then a lightning bolt strikes you. You die. The whole boat is destroyed. And as a fried corpse, you sink to the bottom of the ocean. That's the traditional approach. Like in Zen, you say mu, right? Mu, 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 and you just make mu the only thing that exists. First thing you wake up in the morning, mu, 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 force, 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 effort, 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 effort. You use so much effort, it cracks your mind, and then the mind stops. One, not everyone can handle the cracking of the mind. Two, not everyone can handle the path to the crack of the mind. Three, there's unintended consequences, even if you succeed and are able to do it. When you read the books, right, like the stories of the Zen teachers that became awakened like this, they used mu or they used some koan that allowed them to look, just have their attention directed inward, and they did that very forcefully, kept the attention and the effort tight. So those are the records that you read, right? You end up hearing those stories of people who awaken like that. What you don't hear are all the stories of the people that failed doing that, because it's not worthy to write about failure. If there is any rule, if there's anything, there's one thing that you take away from my 16 years of doing this. It is 3 words. Don't use force. It's the ego that's using force. You might get lucky and crack, but I would not rely on luck. That was my approach. 7 years, force. Yeah. And for me, I didn't even crack. I read Ramana Maharshi, and that was grace. So, so not even the same example, actually. Final point on this, and the reason why it's important. I've observed cases where people did have an awakening through mu and through the application of intense effort. And the other problem with it is because it was produced by grasping as opposed to being produced by non-grasping. When the non-dual opening fades, inevitably the grasping that led up to that breakthrough is still present. And so then it will be then it will be used again to attempt to reproduce the opening, or to reproduce that state of understanding. So by releasing and by abandoning the grasping at the outset, which is what I'm teaching all of you, you avoid building this tower of craving, grasping, and effort that will inevitably have to be knocked down even after an awakening. So in my case, that's what I dealt with, right? I grasped all the way. Then there was a break or a spontaneous grace. But the momentum that I had built over 7 years was still there. So then it took time for that momentum to come undone. Yeah, if from the outset you release seeking, but you still sit, if from the outset you release grasping, but you still sit, then when you discover the depths of the ocean and you find this unboundedness, there isn't 5 years, 2 years, 10 years of grasping and trying behind it. You'd already let go of trying. So you don't have to work backwards like I did.